We used to say our horizon never moved. The sun rose over the same fields, drifted across the same rooftops, and sank behind the same ridge of trees that had sheltered our family for generations. There was comfort in that predictability. Our days were measured not by clocks or deadlines, but by the call of birds at dawn, the smell of bread cooling on windowsills, and the rhythm of soil turned by callous hands. Life in our community was not perfect, but it was ours. We built our homes with timber cut from the surrounding forest, gathered at the old hall on Friday nights, and carried stories forward the way our grandparents had carried them to us. Weddings were entire village affairs. Funerals stretched on for days, with food cooked in giant pots and songs sung into the early hours. Our children grew up knowing which orchard to climb, which creek to wade, which tree to sit beneath when they needed to think. The land wasn't just where we lived. It was who we were. But even horizons can shift if you're not paying attention. The first signs came quietly. A white truck parked near the edge of the fields, its windows tinted so dark we couldn't see inside. Then came men with clipboards, walking the perimeters of our land, taking measurements, jotting notes. They never said much, just polite nods when confronted, promises that they were just surveying. Some of us ignored it. Others muttered uneasily about developers, about corporations that had chewed up towns like ours before. Then the letters began. Glossy envelopes, stamped with logos we didn't recognize. Words like opportunity and progress, printed in bold across the top. Inside were promises of modernization, new housing developments, shopping centers, and economic growth. They spoke of unused land, though every inch of our soil had a memory. They spoke of bringing jobs, though we had always made do by leaning on each other. It was tempting at first for a few. There were those who had debts, those whose children had moved away in search of work. A chance at steady pay, at new infrastructure, at shiny roads and lit-up streets. It was easy to understand why some saw it as a solution instead of a threat. But for many of us, the tone of those letters felt like erasure. They spoke as though we were already gone, as though the soul of our community was a blank canvas waiting to be painted over. The unease thickened when strangers began walking into our town meetings. Men in suits, women with polished smiles. They introduced themselves as representatives of a development project, speaking in rehearsed tones about urban expansion and inevitable change. They spoke of how progress couldn't be stopped, only embraced. Their message was clear: adapt or be swept aside. We listened, silent and stiff-backed. When they left, we sat in that hall long after the echo of their voices faded. Some whispered, "Maybe it won't happen. Maybe they'll move on." Others shook their heads. They'd seen this pattern before, in neighboring towns swallowed up by concrete and glass. And then came the promises, subtle bribes, really, a new school if we cooperated, a community center funded by the project, money for those willing to sell early. A few neighbors wavered, but most of us felt the insult. They thought we could be bought off, that our history had a price tag. The horizon was no longer steady. It was shifting inch by inch, and we felt like a storm rolling in. At night, conversations turned anxious. Families gathered at kitchen tables, whispering about what might happen if the land was taken. The elderly feared displacement. The younger ones wondered if their children would ever know the same freedoms they'd grown up with. Our identity, the fabric of who we were, felt like it was unraveling thread by thread. And yet, no one knew what to do. We were caught between denial and dread, between hope that the storm would pass, and fear that it had already broken above us. We didn't know it yet, but those first whispers of trouble were only the beginning. The horizon was vanishing, and soon we would have to decide whether we'd vanish with it or fight to hold it steady. When the first notices were pinned to doors, it no longer felt like rumor, typed in sterile fonts, stamped with official seals. The notices announced pending rezoning of several parcels of our land. Legal language blurred into threats between the lines. Public interest, eminent domain, redevelopment. For many of us, It felt like a death sentence written on paper. The hall filled that evening, every bench creaking beneath the weight of worried neighbors. The air smelled of damp coats and coffee poured into mismatched mugs, the kind of details that once made these meetings feel comforting. But that night, comfort was gone. The silence was heavy, broken only by murmurs. "We can't fight this," old Mrs. Daly whispered, her hand shaking as she held the paper. "You know how these things go. They've already decided." Across the aisle, young Mark Rio slammed his fist on the table. "That's what they want us to believe, that we're powerless. If we roll over now, they'll take everything, piece by piece." Arguments broke out. Some said we should negotiate, at least secure compensation. Others refused to imagine selling their land, their homes, their memories. Voices rose, harsh words exchanged. Fear breeds anger, and anger breeds division. We were fracturing, exactly as the developers hoped we would. It might have ended there, if not for Clara. Clara wasn't the loudest among us. She wasn't a politician, nor someone prone to speeches. She was a schoolteacher, her voice usually soft and patient, the kind that coaxed restless children into quiet. That night, though, when she stood, the hall fell still. "I don't know about laws or zoning or any of this," she began, her paper clenched tight in her fist. "But I know what this place is worth. When my husband died, this community carried me. When my son was sick, you cooked meals for weeks. We have something here they will never understand. And if we don't protect it, no one will." Her words hung in the silence like a challenge. "Maybe they have money. Maybe they have power," she continued, her eyes sweeping the room. "But they don't have us, unless we hand ourselves over." It wasn't a roar. It wasn't fiery rhetoric. But it was enough. Something shifted in that room. The fear that had weighed on our shoulders cracked, and beneath it, we felt a flicker of something else. Determination. The first steps were small. Meetings held quietly, without announcements. Just whispers passed from door to door. Groups gathered in kitchens and barns, huddled over maps and documents borrowed from county offices. We shared our grievances, but more importantly, we shared resolve. For the first time, we realized we weren't alone. One night, Tom Jacobs brought his laptop to the old mill, projecting a slideshow onto the crumbling brick wall. He'd researched eminent domain, found loopholes, discovered stories of other communities that had resisted and won. His voice trembled with both fear and excitement as he explained. "They count on us not knowing our rights, but we do have rights. We can fight this." It was the first time the word fight wasn't met with silence. It was met with nods. Another night, teenagers drew sketches for posters, bold letters screaming our land, our lives, not for sale, progress without erasure. Their laughter as they painted was nervous, but it was laughter all the same, a rare spark in dark days. Whispers turned into plans. Plans turned into action. We began reaching out cautiously to allies. A sympathetic lawyer in the nearby city agreed to advise us, moved by the thought of ordinary people standing against giants. A journalist who'd grown up nearby promised to tell our story. If we could provide proof, we were cautious, always looking over our shoulders. Some suspected informants among us, neighbors tempted by promises of money, but trust began to weave us tighter. We were too small, too fragile to waste energy on suspicion. And then came the first act of defiance. On a crisp morning, as the surveyors returned with their measuring equipment, they found the field lined with our people, men, women, children, standing shoulder to shoulder, arms linked. No shouting, no violence, just a wall of quiet, unyielding presence. "You're trespassing," one of them barked. "This is our land," Clara replied, her voice steady. They left that day, muttering into phones. We knew it wouldn't stop them, but it was a beginning. That night, the hall was filled not with fear, but with fire. For the first time in weeks, there was laughter, cheering, a sense of pride. We had drawn a line. It was a small victory. But small victories are how wars are won. The spark had been lit. And in the days to come, that spark would become a flame, one that no amount of money, no threat, no institution could easily extinguish. It didn't take long for them to strike back. Within a week, letters arrived threatening fine for illegal gatherings and obstructing authorized personnel. A rumor spread that certain families would lose access to utilities if they continued to resist. Police cruisers began appearing at odd hours, parked just long enough to make their presence felt. Intimidation had begun. Some wavered. A few even quietly accepted payouts, selling their land before things grew worse. But most of us held firm, and the more pressure they applied, the more defiant we became. We organized marches, not large, but loud enough to be noticed. Old men carried banners. Young mothers pushed strollers at the front. Teenagers with painted faces shouted slogans that echoed down the streets. "This is our home. We will not move." Developers dismissed us as a fringe minority. Local officials called us obstructionists. Yet every insult only deepened our resolve. The sacrifices were real. Some lost jobs when their employers, tied to development contracts, grew wary of their activism. Families drained savings to pay legal fees. Friends argued bitterly, and more than one lifelong bond fractured under strain. And then came the smear campaign. Articles appeared in local papers labeling us radicals, dangerous, unwilling to embrace progress. Anonymous flyers circulated claiming our land was contaminated, unsafe, worthless without redevelopment. Even the school board was pressured to denounce our efforts, citing disruption to children's education. The weight of it all pressed hard against us. Nights grew long with whispered doubts. Were we fighting a battle we couldn't win? Were we only delaying the inevitable? But then we would remember that first morning, standing shoulder to shoulder in the fields. The memory of unity was a shield stronger than any rumor. And as weeks stretched into months, we became more organized. We set up committees, legal, communications, logistics. Farmers who once argued over irrigation rights now pooled money for court fees. Teenagers who once wasted afternoons in the woods now ran social media accounts, spreading our story beyond county lines. Retired teachers drafted letters to politicians, every line brimming with dignity and fury. Our movement was no longer fragile. It was alive, growing, unyielding. But with growth came greater danger. One night, Clara's windows were shattered by a rock. A note was tied to it. "Stop, or next time it won't be glass." Another family found their barn mysteriously burned to the ground. No proof tied it to the developers, but the message was clear. Fear rippled through us, but so did anger. They wanted us afraid. They wanted us silent. Instead, their threats hardened us like steel tempered in flame. At the next march, our numbers doubled. At the next town meeting, our voices thundered. And when cameras finally arrived, journalists drawn by whispers of small town refusing to die, we made sure the world saw not victims, but fighters. We were bruised, battered, weary, but we were still standing. And sometimes, standing is the most radical act of all. The turning point came on a gray morning in late autumn. A national newspaper had published an exposé, photographs of our marches, interviews with Clara and others, details of the intimidation we faced. The headline read, "A town on the brink when progress threatens to erase history." Suddenly, we weren't just a local nuisance. We were a symbol. Messages flooded in from across the country, letters of support, donations, offers of legal aid. Other communities, facing their own battles, reached out to say, "You are not alone. Keep fighting." The tide had shifted. Courts, once dismissive, now paused. Judges scrutinized documents more carefully. Investigations were launched into the legality of land seizures. Local politicians, sensing the change in public sentiment, began to distance themselves from the developers. And then came the moment we had prayed for, a ruling in our favor. It was narrow, fragile, subject to appeal, but it was ours. The court acknowledged irregularities in the rezoning process, halting development until further review. When the news reached us, we erupted. Bells rang from the old church tower. Children raced through the streets, waving banners. Families gathered in the square, tears streaming down faces worn by months of strain. It wasn't the end, but it was proof we could win. And when we did, inch by inch, each delay bought us time. Each article, each rally, each sympathetic voice added weight to our cause. The developers, once arrogant, grew defensive. Investors wavered. Public opinion turned sharply against them. The horizon, once vanishing, seemed to steady. But perhaps the greatest victory was less visible. The bond forged among us. Strangers had become allies. Neighbors had become brothers and sisters. We no longer thought in terms of individual families, but as one people. And that unity, more than any legal ruling or media spotlight, was the true weapon that turned the tide. When the final decision came down, the project canceled, the rezoning overturned, it felt unreal. After years of tension, of sleepless nights, of sacrifice and fear, the words on that page seemed too small to carry the weight of what we had endured. But it was real. We had won. Celebration swept through the town like wildfire. Bells rang again. Songs echoed late into the night. Elderly residents wept openly, clutching the hands of children who would now inherit the land unscarred. Yet even in victory, we understood something vital. The battle had changed us. We were no longer the same quiet, complacent community we had once been. We had learned the cost of unity, the power of resilience, the necessity of vigilance. And so we turned our eyes to tomorrow. We repaired what had been damaged. Barns rebuilt, windows replaced, trust slowly restored. But we also built anew, a cooperative fund to protect the land from future threats, a heritage center to preserve our history, a youth council to teach the next generation that their voices mattered. We were no longer just defending our past. We were shaping our future. Sometimes in the quiet of evening, we still whisper about those dark days, the fear, the division, the near collapse. But more often, we speak of the light that emerged, the way we discovered strength we hadn't known we possessed. And when strangers ask what our community stands for, we tell them simply, we are proof that ordinary people, bound by love for their land and each other, can hold back the tide. We are proof that horizons do not vanish if you refuse to let them. And above all, we are proof that when a community fights for its soul, it can win.